Hello, I'm Toycat, and welcome back to the second channel geography video. You probably already know, but when these stand borders were redrawn by Stalin, he deliberately made them as jagged, unworkable, and honestly nonsensical as he humanly could, deliberately so these countries would always be at each other's throats and therefore be more friendly with Russia. It is something which obviously hasn't stood the test of time, but there are many borders around the world which were artificially drawn by a third party, but interestingly enough, many of the worst looking borders, many of the most gerrymandered looking borders, are actually ones that were done by two countries just agreeing this border by itself. And today I wanted to go through some of those weirdest looking borders, the most interesting looking countries, and the countries which have to play on hard difficulty solely because of an agreement with their neighbor. And the best example of this would have to be Canada. When you don't know too much about the world or geography, you look at North America and you say, oh, Canada and the US clearly both wanted this continent, and so they agreed to divide it via this lovely 49th parallel. And when you look at the Canadian border, to the north of it, and you see the area there, you see it's about 2,200 kilometers, whereas the Canadian border to the south, to the Mexican border, is about 1,800, which means that actually Canada got the better deal out of this until you realize the land that Canada has is basically unworkable. No one can live anywhere near most of these places, and so Canada has a lot more land, but it's a lot less usable compared to everything to the south of that. And this is an interesting difference between the west of the country, which looks fair on the surface, but is much less fair underneath, but on the east side, it is done in a much more obviously unfair way, and let's talk about why. All of the major Canadian cities are in former Lower Canada and Upper Canada, Ontario and Quebec, and you can see that they exist along this big corridor over here, this weird salient into the United States if you're looking at it from afar. But the interesting thing about all of their population centers is that if you want to connect these to the maritime provinces, the ones which also have large populations living over there, do you know what the easiest way to get there is? Well, it's via the only stretch that Canada can use. It's this roughly 50-kilometer wide stretch between the river over here and between the US border, which just seems wild that this was ever agreed. I mean, Maine being a part of the United States just doesn't make too much sense. As I discussed in a short, there actually were plans by the British to take this and make a new Ireland. I mean, we've got New Scotland, there's a New England. A new Ireland seems like it would make some sense, but sadly, like regular Ireland, it didn't go according to plan, and so Maine belonged to Massachusetts and then split away, and that means that there is this very interesting fact. I mean, everyone loves to point out that, like, did you know 50% of Canadians live south of this line? It is crazy how low the line is. You expect it to be like, close to the border, but it's literally south of the majority of the Canadian-US border. But what's crazy about this is the fact that most Canadians, you can see that because there are like decent population centers in the Maritimes down to the south here, there is a fairly decent city in Nova Scotia, and then there are big cities over here. The fastest way between these, instead of being a direct route as it should be, basically Canadians don't get the red line and over which most of their population lives south of, and instead they have to go all the way round up here. It's just horrific in my opinion. Instead of it being a 770-kilometer journey between Montreal and Nova Scotia, instead it's something more like 975 because you have to go around the salient. And the craziest bit about this is, like, well, logically you would expect, like with population centers like this, eventually you'd build a highway through it, and a lot of Canadians do drive across the US to get between certain parts of their country and other parts. However, you don't even have that choice because Maine is so sparsely populated that the US doesn't see a reason to build a road from there to there, and so there is this very fun thing that the only territory which they could use to build a rail line or a road doesn't belong to them, and the country that does have it is like, yeah, we don't really see the need to connect Canada to Canada, and I just think that's absolutely wild that that has happened. Speaking of wild things that have happened, I think while we're in the Americas, there's no way we can skip over, I mean, at least partially talking about Haiti, right? I mean, look at this island. How did the Dominican do so well out of that? A lot of Haitians would look at this and think that's very rude too, but I think the craziest Latin American country obviously has to be Chile. This is the country which defies all expectations of what a country should look like. I mean, you look at the world and you see like, oh, a country is like a blob of people, and that blob obviously has weird borders, so Germany to Czechia, for example. It's kind of odd that Czechia sticks in there. I bet there are some German leaders who would love to take it out and make it a bit rounder, but France is almost perfectly a hexagon, and same with Spain, minus Portugal. There are weird exceptions to this, but countries generally blob together from some power center. Not Chile though. If you look at it, it is crazy the height of this country to its width. It is the longest country, if you will, and it's so long that it honestly doesn't seem like it's a good fit for a YouTube video like this. It looks like I should be talking about it in a short because look how tall it is. Look at all of this wasted space to the sides here. This should definitely be a short talking about how Chile in the north is this crazy desert, and then there is central Chile over here, the southern Chile, and then there's so much south of that because the country has every single climate all the way from, again, wild deserts looking like this and what you picture when you're picturing like almost like the Sahara, and then you get all the way to the south, and it's like, yeah, this is the gateway to Antarctica. Anyone who wants to go to Antarctica goes through Punta Arenas, as best I can tell, for cruises, and so that is fascinating that a country can be snowy and be deserty, and the fact that that's just like, yeah, we just have a country that's extremely tall. And what's even wilder is the fact that the reason this exists is obviously there's a mountain range right here. That's the geography basics of it. But even more interesting is that if you actually look at the country, you can see that it actually kind of is like a valley. There is a big mountain over here, and it means that most of their territory to the right there isn't actually usable. Most of the people in Chile live along basically a straight line, and the fact that this straight line country has managed to exist is wild. But what's wilder to me is that means a lot of like state functions are cut down in cost. Building roads, you just build the one road connecting all your cities, or at least the one major highway, I should say. There's obviously roads across the country, but you just need one major highway to go from north to south to Los Angeles over here, and I just think that is a very, honestly, the fact that they don't have high-speed trains is a fascinating one, because they've got the perfect, country size model for that to work, and I just think it's wild. But you know what else is wild? When we look at like, especially Oceania, you can see that Indonesia is a country that has a lot of questions to be raised about it. But the biggest ones are Borneo, which it shares with 2 other countries, and Papua New Guinea. Papua New Guinea is a weird concept for a country. By the way, also, I just want to point out that not only is Papua New Guinea weird, Indonesia is a very high population country. It's the 4th highest on Earth, and honestly, it's wild how little cultural capital comes out of it, despite that. But what's even more wild, I would say, is the fact that when you look at the population density, you can see that it's literally tens of thousand times higher on Java than anywhere else in all of Oceania. So I've heard that some Americans call this Australia, so anywhere in Australia but the continent, not the country, or Oceania, the continent, as the world calls it. Anyway, so Oceania has everything around here. All of these island nations that no one cares about and for some reason have United Nations seats. All of these countries all exist and have a population lower than this single island over here. And it's not even like it's like close, like, oh, it's about the same. No, Java has close to 100 million people, and the rest of this is basically nothing in comparison. That is wild enough by itself, but what's also wild is that Papua New Guinea's existence is this weird edge of, again, it's like sort of Oceania, and it's also, like realistically it should be Asia, but because it's over on the eastern side of these islands, it's Oceania, it's got the lot in with Australia, etc., whereas Indonesia is distinctly Asian, which just doesn't make any sense. Honestly, the Asia to Australia gap is so huge that calling this a continent feels kind of logical and fair, and calling this a continent seems like it's a bit too big to be referring to one. But working out where all of the islands fall is, I guess, gerrymandering but for continents. But today let's talk about Papua New Guinea. It has this whole island, except it's a straight line with this weird stretch where it follows the river, but no one lives in the stretch that would be on their side of it anyway. So why does this need to be the case? Why did they negotiate such a weird border? Why didn't they just have it follow the river for longer so they could have more effectual control? The answer is, God knows, Indonesia is a wild country in so many ways, and Papua New Guinea even too. So next up, I think it'd be easy to, there's a few easy examples I could point out, but I don't want to be too lazy. So instead, we'll just say, Angola, it's split in half. Dr. Congo, you should give them some more access to the sea. Do you really need to have this other part of your country that's separated from the main part? I would say probably not. Also, I would have to say, just to pick on a random country here, Togo, it's got the same fin and tool bit, but without the geographic fortifications. And so not only is it a weird country because it's so thin, surrounded by neighbors that are already surprisingly thin, right? But also, if you actually look at the country, you can see they've got this 50-meter, it says free country salient, but it's actually a 50-meter wide part, 131-meter wide part of Togo, and it's like, why does this belong to Togo? These couple of villages over here, and the answer is, man, borders sure do be weird, huh? This is but again, I feel like the reason we can't mention the colonial African borders is because, like, I guess this is gerrymandering by a third party. A lot of people will blame the poor failures of Africa on the borders that were imposed on them by Western nations, and definitely that is the only thing going wrong in Africa right now, that's for sure. But yeah, I think the Gambia is the other example. This is a third-party imposed border, but I just need to mention the reason that the country looks like this is because they were promised the land around the river from a cannon shot, and they measured a cannon shot as being something like 50 miles, if I'm not mistaken. It must be like 15 actually. But if we look at it on a map, you can see, yeah, it's 10 kilometers more or less from the river. That's what they earn. It's based on cannon shots, but how do they choose the cannon? As cannons get more accurate, are they slowly getting more of Senegal? But yeah, the the Gambia's existence as a country is absolutely wild and 100% reliant on their neighbors deciding to let them exist, which is kind of interesting, which is why we should talk about Europe next, because I think the obvious examples in Europe are like, yeah, why is Bosnia not have any access to the sea? And I would like to say, everyone likes to say, yeah, give Bosnia some sea access. They deserve some coast. Maybe Bosnia doesn't deserve the sea. Have you ever considered that actually you're wrong for thinking Bosnia deserves access to the coast? I don't think they should. I think that Bosnia is very happy being landlocked because they have this tiny bit of coast right here. Are they using it very well? I would say they're not. And so, yeah, don't give Bosnia access to the sea. Maybe we should actually confiscate this bit of shoreline. It causes a lot of problems for Croatia to have to build bridges over both sides of it. So just take away Bosnia's coast. I think we should start a petition for that. Also, I think Russia being here is one of the most, again, arbitrary, dumb things. I mentioned this in my short recently, and everyone focused on the fact that, like, oh, what do you mean most of Prussia's territory isn't in Prussia anymore? And it's like, there's literally a part of Prussia that moved to Russia. Russia just kicked out all the Germans and said, yes, this is Russia now, even though there was, at the time, the USSR was made up of constituent nations, and in those constituent nations were these ones over here, so they made their own exclave. Instead of just doing what they did previously, which is they could have given Ukraine some of Poland some of this, and then taken some of Ukraine. That's what they did. Borders have moved very far westwards since World War II because Russia felt like taking more land. Why didn't they do that rather than taking this random port that's disconnected from the rest of the country? There's a lot of weird cases of history which don't stand up when you talk about the history of time. But one of the other interesting cases of this, I think, would have to be Iraq. I know that it's too easy to talk about European borders and be like, yeah, why do we design a landlocked nation over there? Why do we design a landlocked nation over here? What's the deal with Montenegro? We could do this for basically every European country, and, there's some amount of third-party intervention, but let's talk about Iraq, because Iraq is the wildest looking country. I think, honestly, people overlook it because you think like, oh yeah, well, it's going through some stuff, but seriously, take a glance at Iraq. So on the western side, it's straight line borders, probably, colonial maybe you could say, and then you look over here and it's like, oh yeah, well, these are all borders from somewhere else. But then look at this. These are actual agreed borders of Iran. When you look at Iraq and Iran, you see a fairly logical looking border until right here, where all of the coastline that you think should be part of Iraq is actually a part of Kuwait. And if you want to know a really crazy fact about this one, Iraq's invasion of Kuwait is what led to a bunch of bad things happening, and I've actually become a Saddam Hussein trooper recently. So let me show you this again. In case you think to yourself like, oh, actually Saddam Hussein was a bad guy. I follow the New World Order on everything, or I don't know, the Illuminati are the people who shape my opinions. Let me show you Iraq's presidential election. In 1999, his party won 99.99. Oh, it says 99.96 up here. But 99.99% of people in the country voted for him. He was a popular leader of Iraq, and all he wanted in exchange for that popularity, he basically ran on a referendum of should we annex our neighbors, and their people said yes. He was just following the right to vote. And in case you think, oh, well, like this was just one election, I'm sure he got less popular when he was in power. No, look at the 2002 election. There was a 100% voter turnout. Every single adult person who was eligible to vote in Iraq did vote, and 100% of them voted for his party. He is the most popular president ever, and as a result, I think that, if they just want to take over one of their neighbors, and when that neighbor looks like it's right there anyway, maybe they should be allowed to do so. Who are we to say that you can't invade your neighbor? I do think there is a little bit of, minor hypocrisy when you look at people's opinions. Literally, whatever your opinion is here, I have no doubt it involves someone taking someone else's territory, even because they just took the territory from somewhere else. When you look at your opinion here, it involves someone taking someone else's territory. The whole world is built on this assumption of somewhere in the past, it was okay to have stolen land, but after that point, it's not okay. In the same way in the real world, I feel like a lot of people have this view of there shouldn't be rich people unless I am the rich people. And when I am the rich people, we shouldn't take things from rich people. There are a lot of weird rules that we have around the world based on this. But so as a result, I am officially coming out in favor. I will vote for Saddam Hussein in the next election he's running in. I'm sure, as such a popular man, I'm sure he will be coming back to politics at some point in the future. And I just want you to know, Mr. Hussein, you have my vote. Let's see what he's up to these days, shall we? So in 2003, there was an invasion of Iraq. That sounds bad. Oh no, how could you execute the most popular leader ever? Oh, this is terrible, awful. Anyway, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. What was this video? Hope you enjoyed it though, because if you did, make sure while you wait. Actually, I've got a fun thing. So I'm very transparent about how money works on this channel. If you want to see even, here are my analytics. I recently got a lot more subscribers from shorts. It doesn't translate into revenue directly, and if you look at like the actual, you know, you can make like a good million views as I did in this video I mentioned earlier, and it's still worth about $50. So I'm pretty transparent about how money works. I've tried a couple of other monetization systems. One of those is Patreon. Thank you to all of those people who have joined. And one of the other ones is Amazon affiliate links, and also I guess other social media platforms. I've been recently doing a TikTok experiment, but we'll come into that later. But I've been doing a experiment with the Amazon affiliate program, and they have something which is called a fixed commission, a bounty when visitors try or sign up for valuable services and programs. Basically, if you sign up for, say, Amazon Video using a link, it will be a $3 bounty every single time. And one of the, it doesn't tell me what the bounty is, but it's presumably a few dollars if you just try Amazon Fresh. So Amazon Fresh is their like grocery deliveries. If you have any Amazon Prime service, or if you just like getting food delivered, Amazon Fresh is genuinely how I get all my food delivered. So if you would like food with which you can air fry, just go to this link. There's meant to be a link in there, but just go. Wait, why is there no link? Just go to try Amazon Fresh in the description, and I will get $5 or $3 or $2 on your first order. And then you know what you could do with that food you've just ordered? You could put it in an air fryer. Yeah, exciting. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Wrong tab, by the way. Goodbye.